All right, class. So today we're going to be reading Houdini and Me Chapter 1. This chapter is called The Great Mancini. I was born in Harry Houdini's house. I didn't just say that so you'd keep reading. I say it because it's true. You don't have to believe me. If I wasn't me, I wouldn't believe me either. But it's true, I swear. Look, I took this picture of the plaque outside my front door. I live on West 113th Street in New York City. If you don't know New York that well, 113th Street is just 3 blocks from the most famous park in the world, Central Park. My house is right at the beginning of Harlem. Anyway, this is where I was born and where I've lived all my 11 years. That's right, I wasn't born in a hospital. It's a long story that I won't bore you with, but my parents weren't able to get to the hospital in time, so I was born right here on 113th Street. I wonder if my folks save money on hospital bills. A century ago, this was Harry Houdini's house. He lived here for the last 22 years of his life. Most likely you know Houdini's name, but you probably don't know all that much about him. He was a famous magician and illusionist, but he was most famous for being an escape artist. They would lock him up in handcuffs in a jail cell, a roll-top desk, a giant milk can, and a mailbag. He even was locked inside a hot water heater. He'd always find a way to get out. A Chicago envelope company once sealed him inside the world's largest envelope. He escaped. Houdini even escaped from inside a giant football. They could lock him up in just about anything and he would find a way to get out. There was nobody else like him. A century ago, Harry Houdini was one of the most famous people in the world. When I walk up the stairs in my house, it's cool to think that Harry Houdini walked up those same stairs. When I go down to the basement, it's the same basement where Houdini practiced his escapes. When I go to sleep at night, I'm sleeping in a room where Harry Houdini might have slept. When I get up in the morning, I step on a floorboard next to my bed that makes a loud creaking sound that Houdini might have heard when he lived in the house 100 years ago. Living in the house once owned by this famous guy, I naturally became curious about him. I read a bunch of biographies and I learned a lot. To be completely honest, I'm sort of obsessed with Houdini and with magic. People walking past my house are always stopping to take pictures of the plaque on the wall and ask me questions about Houdini. It makes me feel like I'm a little famous too. I like that. Oh, I forgot to tell you. The funny thing is, my name is Harry too. My parents didn't name me after Houdini. They just liked the name. And my last name is Mancini, which sounds a lot like Houdini. Mancini is an Italian name. Houdini wasn't Italian. In fact, he wasn't even born with the name Houdini. Harry Houdini's real name was Eric Weiss. He was a Jewish kid who was born in Budapest, Hungary. His family came to America and lived in Wisconsin before they moved to New York City when Eric was a teenager. Growing up, Eric's idol was a French magician named Robert Houdin. Harry just added an I to the end of Houdin and called himself Houdini for the rest of his life. I don't know why he changed his name from Eric to Harry. I guess he thought Harry Houdini sounded better than Eric Houdini. Lots of kids from school have seen the plaque on the wall, of course, so everybody knows I live in Houdini's house. Sometimes they ask me to do magic tricks, so I learned a few. You know how grown-ups always say, "Don't try this at home, kids"? Well, here's a really simple magic trick you can try at home to impress your friends. All you need is a raw egg, a little salt, and a smooth, level table. First, challenge your friends to try to balance the egg on one end so it stands up by itself. It's really hard to do, and they probably won't be able to do it. Now, here's the trick. When your friends are trying to balance the egg and not looking at you, take a little pinch of salt in one hand, wave your other hand over the table and say some magic mumbo jumbo like abracadabra or hocus pocus. While they're watching that hand, use your other hand to put a pinch of salt on the table. This is called misdirection. And it's the key to many magic tricks. Magicians get you to watch one thing so you don't notice something else that they're doing at the same time. Anyway, build a tiny mound of salt on the table with your fingers. Just a few grains will be enough to form a little base that will hold up the egg, the same way a tee holds up a football for a kickoff. Position the egg on top of the salt until the egg stands up. Then quietly blow away any extra grains of salt. Presto, you've done it, as if by magic. For the fun of it, tell your friends some more mumbo jumbo about how the position of the sun and the moon on that particular date make it possible to make the egg stand up on one end. That's garbage, of course, but it sounds like it makes sense. It's pretty cool to see the look on your friends' faces when the egg stands up by itself. Maybe I'll be a magician when I grow up. My best friend Zeke Austin already calls me the Great Mancini. Houdini was a really mysterious guy, so naturally there are rumors that my house is haunted. In fact, the lady who owned the house after Houdini died was convinced there was buried treasure in the basement. She spent a year digging around there, but she never found anything. People make up crazy stuff like that all the time. Like at my school, kids are always saying the boys' bathroom on the second floor is haunted. They probably say the same thing about the bathroom in your school. Kids always say weird stuff to try to freak people out. The thing is, when Houdini was alive, a lot of people believed that he had supernatural powers. He did such amazing things that people couldn't believe he was just doing tricks. For instance, he would be handcuffed, shackled, and locked in a big wooden trunk that would later be thrown into a river. It looked like he was sure to drown and die a horrible death. Then, a few minutes later, he would pop up on the surface with no handcuffs or shackles on him. The trunk was still locked and sealed. Nobody knew how Houdini got out. The only explanation seemed to be that he could make the atoms of his body dematerialize and then rematerialize outside the box. People thought he must have had superpowers, that nothing could kill him. Well, they thought that until Houdini actually did die for real on Halloween night in 1926. But even after his death, people were convinced that he would somehow find a way to come back from the dead. To this day, every Halloween, mediums all over the world hold seances to try to communicate with the spirit of Houdini. When he was alive, Houdini never claimed to have supernatural powers. He insisted that he was just doing tricks. But he also said something else. He told his wife Bess that after he died, if there was any way for him to come back from the dead and communicate with her, he would do it. If anybody could come back from the dead, it would be Harry Houdini. I never thought too much about all that creepy stuff. A house is just a house, right? It doesn't matter who lived in it 100 years ago. There's no such thing as ghosts, and the living can't communicate with the dead. But then, one day, something happened that changed my mind and my life. I'll tell you the whole story. The ends.